Study Healing, Episode 1, Reclaiming the Soul with Hoksila Lakota.
What's the topic?
So our topic is coming back to reclaiming your spirit, right?
Oh,
Is that what you wanted to have?
yes,
Like
yes.
that was what you really...
Right, yes.
Yeah.
I think, well, when you go into reclaiming spirit, it's not reclaiming the spirit, it's reclaiming the soul.
Yeah.
Because the spirit is individual from the soul. The wonia, or the ni in wonia, is the actual soul of man, which is the essence that keeps it all together. The spirit, the soul, the body, and the mind, when they're fused, they become one. When we're born in that oneness. When we take the breath of life and become the living soul, it's that wonia, the life, the essence that we lose when we go through traumatic events or splits. The New Age people call it soul loss,
Right.
or soul retrieval.
Right.
And when you retrieve the soul, you bring that back to its original state.
So Hoksila Lakota,
Yeah.
your full name.
Yeah.
When did you start doing this work? When did you start actually doing what you would consider your retreats and start actually working with groups?
Probably about 25 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what brought you into that? What was the catalyst for that?
Well, I went through just a few events that brought me back to my original self. Discovery. I went into a motion of discovery to find out, where did I come from? Why am I here?
Right.
Why am I feel separate?
Right.
What's my true identity?
Right. Yeah.
And I take that back to looking at coming from the Star Nation. As human beings, I believe that we are numbered as the stars of the heavens and the sands of the seas. We come to Earth and we lose the illumination. So what happens is we go through life trying to be illuminated. We're trying to be recognized by man rather than by the Creator. And we want that illumination. So what do? We go through different fads and go off into trying to find that true identity that lives in that star realm.
Right. So tell me more about this star realm, because that sounds very like kind of woo-woo, to star realm. But the idea that we all need to be recognized and that we all want our light to be recognized, that is something that I think everyone that hears it would be able to recognize, that yes, they have that in them, and yes, they see that in others. It's like the Namaste principle, from India. But so what is when you say star, we're all star people, and our light being recognized?
Well, we are spirit and soul, and body and mind. We can recognize the body and mind because there's a lineage that goes to that.
Right.
That help create this physical form. But now let's go back to the spirit and soul of who you are. Because the essence and the life that moves in and out of you, how do we measure that? How can we put a name on that unless we get out of this and tap back into that, which is the unseen? We just get too caught up in this world of matter that doesn't really matter, because when we die, we go back into the earth and become that matter.
I love that sentence. We're caught up in the world of matter, but it doesn't really matter.
Right. But most of us want to make it matter because we want to be recognized again, and we want to be the rock star.
Right.
But how many rock stars are out there that are completely depressed, even when they have it all?
So many. And how many trust fund babies think that the trust fund is actually the source of their problems?
Exactly. So when you look at really coming back to the star, you're going back to originality.
Right.
Now, when you talk about originality, we lose originality when our name is put on a birth certificate and we take somebody else's name, it's not original. In our culture, when we do naming ceremonies, that name is unique. And the one that comes in and does that naming ceremony connects back to that world of the unseen and gives you your original name so that you know where you're going when you depart from the world of matter.
So is this in Cherokee and Sioux traditions?
In
or all the Native American
traditions.
And it's interesting because I grew up LDS, so Mormon, Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, and there's a naming ceremony with that too. So it is interesting that idea, I'm familiar with it.
Well, it's the correlation, I think, is really cool. How it, most cultures, they do the same thing, but it's in a different format.
Yeah.
Which is really neat. But to me, I look at, truly recognizing that true self that lives within you, that lives within the heart of a human being. Because we have the heart, and then we have the lungs that holds the breath, which is the soul.
Right.
When the Creator breathed into man.
So this is the knee.
Right, the knee, wonia. It's the soul of man. And then you have the body, and then you have the mind. And so, to me, I think we grow into our spiritual attributes because we come from the spirit world with talents and gifts, and we grow into those rather than the way the world looks at it and says, well, that's an infant and they don't know. But the reality is they do know.
Yeah.
They have that intelligence already encoded. But it's the program that we take on that creates the layers. And with those layers, that's where we start losing that real identity, the true identity, because you want to take on somebody else's perception of what you need to be.
So you feel that disconnect with your true self.
Oh, yeah.
How do you think this correlates with the idea, because you've actually studied cross-culturally, and I have as well, and I love having that and that connection and actually seeing the things that are truth all around the world,
Yes.
So how does that connect with the idea, like the Buddhist idea of awareness, or some of the other cultural ideas about your true self is the part of you that's the watcher, the part of you that stays stable, but not the part of you that is the actor. Like
Right.
Eckhart Tolle explained this to the Western world really well, this idea of being your awareness, But are you familiar with his work?
Yeah.
A little bit? Yeah. So he has the pain body, and he has the ego, and he has your awareness, that you're that watcher. Is this the same idea that you're talking about?
Well, we go into four bodies. Like there's the spirit body, the soul body, the physical body, and the mental body. And I'm aware of that, and the identities and things that we pick up through television, through
Right.
different fads and people and social media, or wherever we decide to move in and aspire to, we lose that ability to really know that original identity.
And I think we do feel a disconnect from that. So since I mentioned Eckhart Tolle, he says that you are never less yourself than when you're trying to be yourself. He'll say, just
Right.
try to be yourself and see how that goes.
But then again, when you're talking on a physical form, that's one thing. When you're talking on a spiritual, it's another. Because our mind might say, well, this is who I am, but the heart may be saying contrary. And that's where the struggle starts taking place and division starts happening.
Right.
Because what happens is your heart knows what's real, your breath says contrary, and you split the tongue. So you tell the lie, and you become forked tongue. And then once the tongue is split, then the house is split. And the house is divided will never stand, because you're not in your original place. Because the original self has the marriage of right and left brain.
I love it. I love the symbolism, and I love the imagery of that, because if we're going to say it in English, we'd just be like, it's a loss of congruity, which sounds, it's much more like base and harsh than the explanation that you just gave. Right. And that really understanding like the process of that split.
Well, it's like this. When we're born, we don't integrate the both names in the male and female.
Right.
Because we're put in a male box or female box. And that's the first split. And to me, when a person is integrated and brings the both male and female, and is able to move in principle, which is male, but yet act in virtue, which is female, which is love, then there's no separation, and the I stays single. It stays single to the glory of good. What happens is when we're divided, the I starts going this way and that way, and that's what creates the duality. But when you look at, say, the medical staff and the two serpents going up, that's the male and female, that's the DNA, and then the wings represent the eagle, and then the pine cone represents the pineal. So when you have the right and left brain integration and you can balance the male and female, then you're free, and then the pineal will open.
Right. And it's interesting that the pineal gland is the metaphor for circadian rhythm. So it is the metaphor for that sleep and wake cycle, for literally waking up.
Right.
And it also is responsible for our physiological process of sleep and wake,
Right. But most of us are asleep. Because I believe that the sleep and wake, the sleep goes into the physical body, but the awakening comes from the spiritual body. You see?
Yeah, and we do want, this culture particularly, in the modern Western world, we're very geared towards receiving information in a very like logical, linear, left brain sort of way. And we're trying to receive even spiritual things or ideas or philosophies that can only be experienced through an experiential way, And it's why I love the work that you do,
Well, in our workshops, we can take a thought, like we use the medicine wheel, and it goes from the north to the east to the south to the west and then back to the north. The north represents mental, and then spiritual, emotional, physical, and back to mental. When we take a thought to heart, we're going clock spinning. We are going right spinning. And from heart, it goes to soul, which is the emotion. Then the heart, the spirit and soul begin to basically govern the body. And then the body ends up shifting, and the mind goes into alignment, and you begin to clock spin, right spin, and aspire. So if you take a thought and you take it to heart, and your heart rejects it, then it starts going backwards. So you take a thought in the body, you sell the soul, meaning your breath, you tell the lie to get it, and then you bypass spirit, because spirit is the one that has the intelligence. Because for us, when you're living in heart, the heart will never betray you, but your mind will. Because
and you can feel it. There's an actual physicality to these things of moving in the right direction, the correct direction, versus moving in the direction that is counter to the way we should be.
If you take like the swastika, it goes counterclockwise and spin it clockwise, then it's right spinning. Turn it around, it's left spinning.
So the swastika, that's very interesting to me, because I've seen that symbol different places in the world, including I've seen it in Montana in a Native American lodge. I've seen it in Nepal, where they're using that symbol, and that's this right spinning way of using it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's like when you turn it around on the medicine wheel, it goes from the mental to the body to the physical, then it goes to the soul, and then bypasses spirit. It starts moving counterclockwise.
So it's pretty easy to be tricked by something that is a distortion, because it presents the same, but they're moving in different directions.
That's why either you're right spinning and you're aspiring, or left spinning and degenerating.
Right.
You see?
Right.
And so for us, we do a full workshop on how that whole symbol works and how we need to take everything to heart. because your heart will never betray you. Now, when we're children, we're told, oh, don't take it to heart, don't take it personal. I say take it all to heart and take it personal, because that will direct you in the direction you truly need to go.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
I was doing some work with a student of mine this week that was having I own this massage therapy college, but the student was having a realization about some things that they had done in the past. And they felt like they almost felt like they had a split personality, because they couldn't believe that they had done these things when they realized they had, and then that they actually had thought of themselves as this very good person, you know? So they had this like very correct spinning side of themselves, but they also had the shadow side, right? That was spinning the wrong way. And I was overjoyed to hear that they realized that. You know what I mean? This is good news. That's not what a split personality is. That is actually you coming into alignment and realizing that you have responsibility for everything that happens to you in your life. You know? And when you take that accountability, that's where you really see change. Do you take people through that, and do you help them to take that accountability and to see that good news?
Because you got to realize that once the energetic field is fragmented, what happens is that energy comes in and stays within that person's energetic field. You know, and has a license to invade, you know, at any given time, or the person will align and reject that energy, but then through thought, smell, taste, it comes back and it begins to live in that person's space, and then takes them off into dysfunctional relationships or
so
circumstance.
In Western modern world, there's a trend starting to call this all habits in the body, just so we have a framework to understand it, the things that become habits and we start operating in this habitual way. And that's great. We need vocabulary for it. You were talking to me about the power of some of these ancient languages and using some of the Native American, the traditional languages. So Sanskrit is used, Gurmukhi is used, Latin is another language that's used that has like powerful resonance, Pali, those types of things. The Navajo language is used, right? And so you were talking about the importance of using those words in ceremony versus just English words, because of it. English is very linear, logical, sequential, and we find meaning in it, but it doesn't emote meaning just by speaking it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's pretty flat, and it, you know, the back to front and the front to back is what we have to look at, and that's that reverse clockwise, counterclockwise thing. When you look at ancient languages, they were given to the people of many different tribes through the tongues of angels. It's an angelic language. So when you say a certain word, you invoke a certain energy. And like for us, you don't go out and sing somebody else's song that was given to them spiritually unless it's gifted to you. Because if you mess up in that song, you might end up creating an enemy. Rather than trying to help people in that setting. So it's very important to understand the direction that you're calling. You know, we don't call north. Waziatakia. You know, we're calling in the true name of the one that holds the energy of the north or the east, and the attributes that come from those directions that we have to truly understand. Like for me, I use color therapy, and there's 4 colors connected to the medicine wheel. And normally I'll take people through a workshop, and I'll ask them to choose a color with their heart, not their mind, to let spirit choose that color, because when they choose that color will reveal the direction they need to sit in the lodge, because that grandfather, we say, or the one holding that energy in that port, will come in and minister the healing for that individual just through the color they chose. You see, whether they have a problem within the first chamber, second chamber, third chamber, or the crown.
Yeah.
So to recognize how that works and teach people is really important, because for us, recognizing the East is important, because awareness, acceptance, and accountability come from that direction. And everything that's living and breathing recognizes that direction when the sun comes up. We try to live under the sun and have no shadow. You know, we do that in ceremony to connect back to the re-erection of the tree, the resurrection, leaving the old part of you behind and coming forth as a new. That's what the whole ceremony is about.
Yeah, I think what you have said about actually understanding the language, and earlier you spoke to me about the importance of really understanding language, understanding the ceremony before you go into a place where you're leading someone through that. That's so important, because we've both studied in multiple traditions, and I had an experience a long time ago with one of my teachers where it was in Thailand. And I was interested in the idea, I'd heard about their magical tattoos, and I was interested in the idea of the sakyant. And these are basically tattoos that the literal translation is that the monks or the rusi, these are holy men, will put the magic into it, and they're blessings. They're blessings so that you will have protection. They're blessings so that you will have all the things that people want, all the human needs that we all share together. So love, prosperity, connection, safety, all those things. And so I was interested in the idea. And they also had these things called yantra cloths. And so I went to, it was an antique store in Chiang Mai that I went to, and it was really expensive. And I was new to this work and new to understanding Thailand and the traditions and the culture. And I went into the shop, and they had what I thought at the time were these really cool, they were yantra cloths. So it's where these symbols and this blessing is put onto this cloth for someone else, for someone else. And I was dating someone at the time. He had a couple of sons that I really liked, and I thought these would be cool for those boys, and I was looking at, it was completely an unhealthy attitude about it, right? That going in as kind of like touristy and getting these things that appealed to me visually. So I picked out a couple of those things for the boys. They were not super expensive, but they weren't cheap. They were like $300 to $500 each, And I took them back to my little guest house where I was staying. And that night, I just had these swirling, crazy, nightmarish dreams. And all these symbols and all these things were just happening. So in the morning, I took the cloths to my teacher. And I sat down, this is Arjan Pichette, and I sat down with him, and he doesn't speak a lot of English, but he was able to clearly educate me on that I had no right to have those cloths if I didn't speak the language. Right. He did it in such a sweet, paternal, loving, kind way. And at the end of our exchange, he sort of, he's like, now give me the cloths, and give them to me. And it wouldn't matter if I had paid $20,000 for them. I would have given him the cloths at that point, because my experience was so profound with that. And so I gave him the cloths, and he gave me back this little plastic Buddha statue, like you would with a child. It was very much this little child exchange of we're going to trade, give me this and you get that, And it was a really great lesson for me that at that point I did not understand those things. Those things were not meant for me, that I had no right to be using that type of stuff without an understanding of it. Right. And so having someone that can be a guide is so important, and to not just dabble in these different traditional cultures it's a little bit disrespectful to not have a guide that knows what they're doing in that specific culture. How do you feel about in general? I mean, you lead these workshops and these trainings. So how do you feel in general about people from other cultures coming in and learning traditions that have been sacred to your ancestors and sacred to your people?
I think it's really important to educate people. Like in a lot of our workshops with Four Winds, we come in and really do this education that people really need before they step into any type of ceremony, and that's to have the respect for the people that are ministering ceremony unto them. And so, to me, I think education is really important. And I get kind of hung up on it because there's times where people will say, oh, well, you're selling a sweat lodge. And it's not about selling a sweat lodge. You're taking people through a digital education series on really what that looks like and how to recognize these directions and really get to know what they're stepping into, so they can get 100% out of whatever you produce.
Right.
You know, in regards to ceremony.
Why? I agree. The idea of selling the sweat lodge. So if you're going to spend a significant amount of your time doing work that promotes others' healing and promotes their well-being, then traditionally people would be bringing things to that teacher. Right. And they would have provided for that teacher. We don't have a system like that now. And so how do you feel about an expectation, like when you said, people said you shouldn't sell a sweat lodge, you know, some people may feel like you shouldn't even charge for healing work, those types of things.
Well, that's the part that I don't charge for. Yeah. We give that part away, but it's the time that goes into the educational piece that I believe there needs to be an exchange. Now, if you're living on a reservation and you have the community coming to you and bringing you food, tobacco, and then you do a lodge for them and help them process something, then there's really no cost in it, but to, you know, you're in one place, you're not traveling. But when people say, hey, can you come to Idaho and do a workshop on, say, a medicine wheel and what it really represents, then yeah, I have to jump in my vehicle and what it cost me to get there and 2 or 3 days of my time and energy when I could stay home and, say, do a project and make the same.
Right. And also it's just another system of exchange.
Right.
So it depends on how you treat how you treat money, how you treat the things in your life. There's so many things these are all just stuff. It's all pretty neutral. It is the energy behind it.
If you want to go deeper than that,
I do.
Then what happens is anytime you put a money system on anything, you devalue it. You really do. Because, like, say, in the Christian world, the master went and turned over the money changers. It wasn't because they were disrespecting the temple. It was because he knew that through taxation that his people would be in bondage. Right. You see? And so
it's the taxation part.
So when you really go into trading,
how much more controlled it is when you have a monetary system.
So when you go into trading paper and ink and coins for things that are spiritual, the spirit world doesn't work on that exchange. And you can get lost in that exchange really fast. I know a lot of people that get into wellness and then they go into many different directions, and then before you know it, they won't even minister unto the poor. And those are the ones that really need it. Yeah. Instead of those that
So you got to really keep yourself in check, because we actually don't have a barter system.
Well, see,
so you would have to have a community supporting that. You know, back to the original. If you were in one place,
for me, I'd rather work with the poor than the wealthy, because the wealthy are not ready to chop wood and haul water, and the poor are ready to do that. The poor are ready to sit on the earth because that's where they're sitting anyways.
I have found an exception to that because when I first went into business, I really had a difficult time accepting money at all. And I would almost push it away. But then I realized that I would need to accept money to grow this business, to have the things that I could give to the people that were asking me to give to them. And I've learned truly that business is a spiritual thing, and that is you get continual opportunities to make the most ethical choice, to respond in a way that's neutral, to not be caught by money, and to continually be in a place where you feel very, very comfortable with the free flow and the exchange. And that almost brings you back to probably the feeling of a barter system.
Well, like for me, money isn't bad because we'll scholarship. Like say, if somebody's willing to pay a full price for a workshop and say we have one or two people that can't, then we'll scholarship and people will be able to come in and experience whatever we want to deliver. And I think that's what creates the balance. We just have to remember that through any type of ceremony, anything that we do, that we retain the integrity that moves along with it. Because if you tell universe, well, I'm not worth it, then universe is going to say, well, no, you're not worth it.
Right.
And you'll struggle every time you try to do anything. Right. But if you say, well, I'm worth $1 million an hour, then universe will bring that to you if you believe that. So to me, I don't really put too much on the money part of it because I know it always comes forth, whether it's at that setting or a week from then. It'll always be there. And I don't need to chase it. I just need to let it chase me.
I think a good internal check is, are you comfortable and able to give money? I remember the first time that I owed a substantial amount in taxes, and it came in, and my businesses were starting to be a little more successful, and I felt so grateful that I had that money in my bank account, that I could just pay that was not an issue, and I really, we all are working with money right now, but the focus is still on the work that we do. And the money does come, but there is an energy to money. I've watched people that spend money on a self-improvement thing, as long as it's not like an addiction for them, but they're like spending on self-improvement. And they're actually leveraging that to get that improvement in their life in whatever area they're looking at. And they don't seem to have an issue with money when they do that, because they really are moving in, like you said, the right direction. They're moving clockwise. And then I've watched people that believe they're being generous, and they might like treat for a whole bunch of people in a bar, like all their, and I guess there would be a way you could do that and it would be okay too. But I've watched it before where people give and they're giving for show. They're giving with fear. They're giving with like resistance in their heart, and then later you see them like in the fetal position. They don't, they're like they regret it, and they're moving in that counterclockwise movement, and that's still money, and that's still giving, and back to it shows up almost the same, but you get a very different result. And so I think money gets a bad rap, but in my experience, and it sounds like yours too, when you really talk about it, because you receive money,
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean,
but it's the energy.
Right. I just, like I say, I don't chase money. I let it chase me. And when I have that attitude, the door's open. It opens all the time. It's like whatever I need, it just comes and lands on my front door. Because I know that I'm worthy of it. I know that I do the work that the Creator's called me to do, to help people come out of this place of bondage and go back to that original state. That original state that takes us to the innocence of the child, takes us back into this thing called the Garden of Eden. where there's perfect balance. There is no fear, there is no shame, there is no guilt. You are just you. And when you get to that you, then you can observe and really say, okay, well, where is this tree of life now? Because I want to get to this tree of life. I want to get back from here to here. Mm-hmm. We have to go from here to here, no different from the spirit world to earth.
Right.
And on earth, we have to get back. Mm-hmm. Right. You have to go from here to here, then here to here. Mm-hmm. Because when you go from the mighty change of heart to the renewal of mind, right, you are going back to being born again, is what they call it in Christianity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To be born is to be re-erected, resurrected. Right. So you can walk on your feet again. Right. So you can stand with integrity. Right. So you can have that core strength and core values. Right. But there's a system to that. You have to go back to the beginning. You have to go back to the seed in the soil. You got to go back to mom and dad. Mm-hmm. Dad holds the seed, mom holds the soil. So when you start really taking a look at your lineage, the linear line, you look at everything through here. Now you can get stuck on this linear line and see everything through a linear lens until you go into the re-erection. Mm-hmm. And by that re-erection, now you're connecting to sky and earth, which is male and female, again. Mm-hmm. But you're walking upright. You're not falling over and letting people walk all over you, because that's what usually happens when we go through a event that we coin bad. We take a fall and we don't get back up. Mm-hmm. And we become a victim. Right. And we become stagnant energy. We become stagnant water. And what do we attract? Mosquitoes, bloodsuckers, stench. And that's where we stay until we die. So I think at this given time, with everything that's happening in the world, that it's a good thing that we have to go into our home. Because what that's really telling us is go in here. Mm-hmm. And stay in here for a moment and take a look at what's real and what's not.
Yeah, I definitely believe that whatever happens in life, that it's a very good idea to be a lover of reality and to find the gift in it. Mm-hmm. And to really find the way that it can be empowering. And so that is very empowering to use as a metaphor, that means for us to start looking inside a little more. Right. And that introspection, that it is the way to start re-emerging. Right. I mean, I love that
re-erecting.
That visual of re-erecting, because it is like we start out on this path in life and we have our interpretations, our traumas. No one can traumatize us. We can only traumatize ourselves through our interpretations of that trauma, right? And so then after we've had all that happen, finding ways to gain that understanding and to clear all that and come back to where we originally were it still is the idea of you have to unlearn everything you learned. Right. That you know when you're here that you really know nothing, and it is a journey that we all have to go through. So
well, it's emptying the trash and rebooting. Mm-hmm. How many belief systems have we taken on? Everything now that used to move in a circle is now in the square. Mm-hmm. Because what we've subscribed to is a square system, a system of complete logic. Mm-hmm. When you graduate school, they put a square cap on a round head, and they move the tassel, and they move the tassel from the left side to the right, which is from the female to the male, and then it's an induction to a square system. Yeah. And with that square system, you stay in that square. But prior to that, you come from a round birth canal, and then you put in a square crib. You're given a name that comes from a square book. You go into a square home.
Nothing square in nature.
Right.
Nothing square in nature.
Right.
I mean, traditional cultures understood this. The architect Gaudi understood this, and brought it into his designs. That nothing is those straight lines and square. It's very much against nature.
That's why we believe that Unchimak, our grandmother Earth, the Creator creates everything round. You know, the tree is round, and we cut it, mill it, and turn it into a square, and then build a square institution and lock people in it. You see, and so really, indigenous housing, we're all round. The teepee's round, the hogan's round, the igloo is round.
In Mongolia,
right.
The homes are
The
round.
homes
Also,
are
yurts are round.
and that's the way energy moves. And see, we've stepped away from that and just really adopted this square system. Like when I was in New Zealand, talked to the elders, and their homes and huts were round until they introduced the square marae, and they called it a prayer house, but it was made with plank and wooden floors, and it was nice. And they accepted that part of it, of that square home. But really, it took them into that square system.
It took them into it, right.
Right. It inched them into
Right.
it. Right. So now we feel like our true identity comes from
Gateway,
a university.
like the gateway drug.
Right, right.
Like,
And
here's just one little box. Just take one little box.
Right.
You don't have to take all of them.
Right.
Just try one.
So,
Then
you
you're
know,
in.
we have to get back to that universal circle again.
Yeah.
We have to get back to honoring the sacred feminine, the earth. We have to...
So this idea of the sacred feminine, it's been talked about a lot for a while now. I mean, all through my lifetime, this has been something that's been talked about. And at what point, so when we try to shift a pendulum, we rarely come to just balance. So at what point do you think it's going to swing too far into the feminine and then have to start coming back? Like, where do you think we are with the pendulum right now with all of that?
I think really it can be a distortion, because to me it's like, I know a lot of people or feminists that are becoming too masculine and too...
So they're not moving more into the feminine.
Right, right.
They're moving into like aggressor. And
Right.
into-
Well, they're taking on both roles of the female and male, and they're really booting the male out. But that's part of another system of the male out of the home and the female just raising the children.
Yeah. And it's in our culture right now, but in all cultures. I mean, Hippocrates was Socrates was killed. You know, Jesus was killed. It's by the people that they were serving in many cases. And so for me to say, I was about to say that it's very controversial to say anything about the masculine and feminine right now. But I think it's important to do that because there are a lot of misunderstandings about it right
Well, there is. Well, the thing about it is how do you even examine the masculine or feminine when you really haven't even examined your heart? Because your heart isn't made to be mean.
Yeah, it all goes back to examining right here.
So when you really look at the heart, I say, well, you know what? Test your heart and find out what's real and what's not. Take a look at the lower chamber, and if you're living in appetites, and it's all about, you know, driven by sexual energy, then the lower chamber is basically governing the heart and the mind, because that's where you're living. And so if you're living in the lower chamber, you're living in the animal, you see? So you have to rise up above that. And if you can take the energy from here to the second chamber, where contracts are written or forfeited or rewritten, you know, you have to take a look at that, because that's where emotion lives. And then love lives here, and then renewal of mind. It's like a marriage. When you take a proposal, an engagement, a marriage, and a reception, what are you proposing today to change what you do if what you do is not right? How will you engage with that engagement? How will you marry it and fuse it to have the reception, to have your receptors turned on?
Right, because this is the
Right,
reception.
because
this is a
most-
reception that is just like wires and switches and things
Right.
like that. But in traditional cultures, this is Native American cultures, but also the Eastern cultures and stuff, this is the seat of emotions. This is also the enteric nervous system is,
Right.
we're calling it now the gut brain.
Right.
That gives you a lot of feedback. And that's actually controlling a lot of what you do.
Well, if your spleen or your solar plexus and your liver's off,
Right.
then basically
you're not getting good data
Right,
up
right.
here.
You
You
haven't-
don't have healthy emotions.
right,
and
because
a
you're
healthy
stuck in
gut.
your liver and you're
Right.
stuck in anger.
Right.
And so what do? Take a drink and try to subdue the anger because you don't want to deal with it. And then
Right.
you double tax the liver.
Right.
So each system of the body, we believe in 13 systems. And in each system, it houses energy. You see? And so if you don't go in and clean those systems, then you have dams built up and energy gets stuck. And you want to go and work on people and be the healer, but really you're not expelling this energy. It's actually staying within you, or a fragment of that is staying within you, and then you become just as sick as your patient
Yeah.
because you're not a hollow bone. You're
Right.
not just moving it through you.
Yeah. You have to be as clear, as
Right.
clean as possible inside to
Exactly.
do healing work.
Right, right.
So, what are some of the experiences that, or what's one profound experience that you could share with us that either you've had doing the work you do, or that one of, do you call them clients? Do you call them students? What do you call the people that you work with when you take them on these journeys?
I was in New Zealand about 4 years ago. I met a lady that was diagnosed schizophrenic. When I first met her, she was a friend of mine's auntie. When I first met her, I just didn't even want to get near her because she was filled with many voices. Just energies were just constantly going. One minute she'd be laughing and then crying and then talking to herself. I thought, wow, this one's over the top, right? So we started working together and talking and sharing. And one time I fasted with her, and it was like a port opened and revealed to both of us that the reason why she was in the state that she was in was she held the genealogy of her people, both on mom and dad's side, and the voices that she was hearing were the names of the people that were coming to her that were in the spirit realm, wanting her to do the bidding for her in the physical. And so we started chipping away at that. Within 1 year, 13, 14 months, she was clear of all voices and off of all medication.
How's she doing now?
Great.
Yeah.
Job, marriage is stable. The medical kind of felt funny about it because it was like,
Of course they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because that has been something that Western medicine and psychology has kind of had an aversion to. They like to have things named
right,
the way they name them, not to morph over to the way that traditional cultures have named these things. And so if you're talking about spirits of ancestors or finding those types of sources for those voices, that's not something that they readily accept. It's seen as unintellectual,
Right.
and it's seen as counter to their science.
right,
But when you really start drilling into it, there's not a lot of science behind our mental illness, and we don't have good solutions to it.
right,
And anyone who has dealt with family members, loved ones, friends that have these things, mental illness, we know that it tends to be a continual struggle.
Right.
You don't just go to the doctor and get this fixed.
Right. Well, medication and stuff, it has its
place.
Right, it has its
Yeah.
place. You can't, perform surgery without it, or
Right.
numbing agents or whatever, and it does have its place. But to me, to say, well, we cannot help you unless we do a diagnostic here and put you on something and then give you government assistance. To me, I used to yank a lot of our youth out of those situations and find out the true cause of what was going on in their world to create this energy that was completely taking them over. Or even in suicide, you know. I've had incidences where people would call me completely under the influence, ready to take their own life, and to share things of spirit with them and bring them back home and bring them back into sitting on earth and taking our men and connecting that root chakra to earth to really feel the female energy that comes from our grandmother, from earth. Then they can start feeling that pulsation, and then they can start breathing again and falling into this rhythm of life rather than sedate. Sedate is see you at another date, sedate. You know, when people learn to sedate, they're not dealing with the trapped emotion. They're not dealing with things that have taken place. That's why we have to go back and recognize the past and put the past behind you so that we can move forward. To fast is to speed things up. When we fast, we speed up the internal side of us. We go for 4 days in ceremony with no food, water, fast, to speed up that inner self, which is the spirit and soul of who we are, and let the physical side die. Because the physical side, when we start living in the physical, then we have to go in and have a physical because we're dying. You know, we're just feeding ourselves contaminants and everything else and not really paying attention to what's important, and that is being immortal, eternal. What's going to happen once we leave this body? Are we just going to float around out there, or are we going to go into the other realm with an addiction? Like most of my clients that would attempt suicide, I'd say, hey, what binds you on earth is going to bind you in the spirit world. What you create here is what you're going to take there.
Yeah, I have a friend who's chronically suicidal. And it's interesting because the attraction to suicide is as a way out of this physical plane. And so if your belief really is that you'll escape all of that, then you might have that attraction. But if your understanding is that things continue on and you take it with you, then you really are faced with almost like this anticlimactic moment of the drama stops and you're right here and it's time to look at reality, take accountability, and start moving forward. But it's almost like this fantasy, like suicide's this fantasy, fantasy realm of, keeping you like that's going to be a better way. It's going to save you. It's almost like no different than someone who thinks there's like a special person on the earth that's going to provide for them and take care of them. And, and they're looking for that. People sometimes use suicide as a version of that, a version of they're a needy child and there's a way out, or someone else that's going to take care of it. So that facing that you are the one that will be taking care of it is imperative, And I learned that mostly from the training that I've had in Eastern traditions. But I loved hearing about that from some of your Native American traditions as well.
I had an uncle that spent a good part of his life on earth as a heroin addict. And my grandmother and my grandfather split up, and there was my mother, her sister, and her brother. They all three have passed already. But my uncle spent half of his life addicted to heroin because he really didn't feel the love of his mother. Every time he'd come into the home, his mother, my grandmother, would look at him and see the husband that abandoned them. And never really gave him the unconditional love. So he left this earth finding love in heroin. I remember once he came to me in spirit and said, there are things that you need to do for me that I'm no longer able to do. And that's to tell my mother, your grandmother, that I forgive her for looking like my father. For treating me in a way that created this lack of love in their space. And I went to see my grandmother one day, and I said, you know, Grandma, I says, I had a visitation from Uncle, and he wanted me to say something. And she says, what? To forgive him for looking like his father. Because he never felt the love from you. And she started to weep because she knew it was true. And she said, you know, tell him I love him. And I said, no, well, you tell him because he's standing right next to you.
Right.
And that was part of his journey and the work that we have to do for those that are connected to us energetically or genetically to help with their transition. Because he took with him that separation between him and his mother when he passed.
That's such an important lesson too, because whatever someone else does, I always try to look at in what ways have I done that? Because we could all look at ourselves, and I would say that most of our reactions to other people, especially if it's a stranger, where we have like a visceral reaction, a lot of that is probably coming from some other thing in our past that reminds us of that person. And we're making them, you know, pay for that, sin's too harsh of a word, but we're making them pay for that perception that we had of that individual and the trauma that we actually, I felt this strongly, that we actually gave to ourselves, you know, because we really are. It's our subjective experience, and that's the only way we can be traumatized. We've probably noticed now as we've gotten older or as we have different understanding of things that it's harder for things to have that effect on us because of our understanding. That's all internal, you know?
Well, to become immune is to say, forgive me for doing whatever I did to make you offend me.
Yeah.
If I can get to that place in life, then I'm immune to whatever took place between...
You take that power back,
right,
that energy
you take
back.
it right back. And most people will not want to examine that because they want to point the finger and have avenues to say, well, this is why I do what I do.
Right.
Because so-and-so did this to me.
Right.
For me, it's really going back to the 7-year cycles, going back from conception to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 21, because what happens is if we don't do
21 to 28, when the brain becomes an adult.
If we don't do the Jubilee every 7 years, then whatever took place in that 7 years rolls into the next. And you'll keep on repeating the same lesson or story or situation to teach you. And until you get it, that's when the coin drops, and then there'll come another one after that one. So to me, it's looking at conception to 7, what mom and dad were going through at the time of your conception and what was going on even in life. Like my former partner was born the day John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Can you imagine the grief and everything that she came into?
The day of her birth, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that energy will always move.
Yeah, yeah, that energy does connect all of us.
Yeah, so.
Your grandmother was ultimately healed because of your uncle coming back and letting her know what she had been doing.
Right.
It probably healed her both of the pain that she had, the anger that she had towards her husband.
Right. And she was in the living.
And helped her understand her role in it.
Right.
You know?
She was in the living.
Yeah.
He was on the other side.
Right.
And I believe that bridged a gap and fused them back together.
The whole family.
Right.
Like I see the whole family coming together from that.
Right.
That's amazing.
And we have to understand that when we when we go through this thing called re-erection, is when we begin to clear pathways, because it stops with you. I believe that everybody that's born today will be the fall guy for their generations, for the past and the generations of the future, because it's time for us now to realign and correct any genetic hiccups that move through our genealogy, then move forward with this old but yet new connection back to the unseen.
Right. And with that connection, with that correction, you find not shame, you find not any type of guilt, you find only love.
Right.
You find so much freedom in it. So people might be scared to take that on, but you don't, by taking accountability for everything, you just feel free when you take that step.
Well, like I say, if we don't get back to the garden, if we don't build our altars and wait for instruction, how can we build an ark and sail through the floods, as Noah's story?
Yeah.
When you take two metals, and you arc them, you weld them together, the actual weld becomes stronger than the metal. How many of us are arced with the Creator to be able to build an ark, which is the vessel that holds male and female of every kind, you see, and sail through this thing called Corona, you see, or through viruses that are coming, to be able to preserve this generation from the flood.
And Corona, you know, it's just one thing.
That's just one thing, and there'll be many.
I remember I was...
Smallpox?
Yeah.
I mean, it goes on and on.
Totally.
Right.
I was made the... I was given a calling in my church of being in charge of food preparedness. It was back in 1999. And so I was very young. I was like in my very early 20s, and I had everyone over, the whole neighborhood, everybody, and they were canning things at my house. And it occurred to me at one point that there was a real danger of us just hoarding things. You know, we're so obsessed about this end of the world stuff. And it occurred to me in that moment how silly that was, knowing that we all have an end to our own life. It's absolutely guaranteed. And we're not panicking about it. We know that our days are numbered the moment we're born, you know, and we're able to put that out of our mind with the distraction of an apocalypse, you know? And so the apocalypse, so these types of things, and even the coronavirus stuff we're dealing with right now, and some of the tumultuous things happening around the world, you know, because we've already got that energy going. They've been there the entire time. They're just coming to a head, you know? And those types of things, it's important to be aware of it, but it's also important to know that we as humans tend to use those as distractions from doing our own work. But like you were saying, it could be the reminder to do our own work. Just as money can go in either direction, this can go in either direction. This can spin clockwise, the appropriate, or you can use it to spin the other way.
Well,
so your admonition is to spin it clockwise and to do your inner work when you think of Corona, when you think of human suffering, that all that brings you back to this is where you start with healing that.
Well, they say if you're vibing high, it'll pass you by. You know, so...
If you're vibing high, it'll pass you by. I love it.
I mean, so the reality to it is if you're eating good food, you're eating living foods, you're exercising, you're doing what you need to do, you're keeping your mind clear, you're keeping your heart pure, you're staying away from places that you shouldn't be, you're standing on holy ground, or you're standing on good soil, you're tilling your garden. I mean, all these things, it's really taking us back to... Yeah,
you're connecting. You're connecting with Grandmother Earth. And you're boosting your immune system through your health practices. And you're doing what we are meant to be. So you're vibing high. Which is to connect. And we're not hearing tons of talk on any of that from our formal health authorities. And that is amazing that... The only advice we have is wear masks, stay away from each other, stay inside.
Well, there's nothing social about distancing.
There's nothing healthy about those things.
Social distancing what's the social about it? You know, I everybody's running around just completely.
It's social isolating.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, I mean, it is what it is, and it's here for now, and we just have to love it and accept it. And
Because it's here.
Yeah.
Because it's here.
Right, right.
Steven Pinker wrote a really great book that I read a while back called The Better Angels of Our Nature. And it talks about the decline of violence in the world and how we were actually on a path of overall, he believed, decreasing in many of the like interpersonal violent things we used to do. And he talked a lot about like some of his rationale about why he thought that we had decreased violence was that we started seeing that star in each other. We started seeing that namaste principle. We started seeing each other's light. And some of that was from hygiene practices, from evening out of incomes, things like that, from being able to have beautiful collective experiences. And we will need to be very mindful with the masks to still see each other, you know, because not seeing each other does lead to violence.
Well, the thing about it is, though, is the way I look at it is when you look at somebody with a mask, you're really looking at their eyes, and when you're looking into their eyes, you're seeing into the windows of the soul.
Yes, you are. But you
know,
need to first look into their eyes.
Right. So the mask thing, I believe, is a blessing, because when I meet people and talk with people,
Look at you spinning it in the right direction.
Right. I'm just looking into the soul. You can see fear in people's eyes. You can see love in their eyes, and I think it's a beautiful thing.
So what are you doing, Lakota, when you like with everyone that you see? Are you getting their eyes? Are you working to get their eyes and make eye contact?
Right. And say, hey, you know what? Get rid of the fear.
Yeah.
Because nothing comes of fear but separation.
And then
nothing good comes of fear.
Being unafraid of any type of rejection.
Right.
It's a really important thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Okay, so if people want to get a hold of you, if they want to hear about your seminars, where do they reach out to you? How do they find you?
If you go to Podbean, we have a podcast channel with a lot of good information with Four Winds.
Four Winds Wellness.
Yeah, Four Winds Wellness.
Yeah.
On the internet, you can find us. I'm in between here, New Zealand and Australia. But I'm staying in America. It's just
we're all a little bit homebound right now.
Right. Well, I have to be here. You know, my mom passed this year, and you know, I'm just kind of taking care of my dad and just kind of taking care of me.
Yeah.
You know, going through that grieving process.
I'm glad you're here because you are here.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So what I'm doing now is I'm just kind of networking out here and working with universities and other agencies to bring people back to the rock star that they are, you know, and taking a look at stepping back into that spiritual space, and maybe even taking on a new name and identity.
It's in Thailand where I've spent a significant amount of time, like almost 30 years, you know. They have a practice where you are given a new name whenever you go through different changes in life. And that's a common thing, to change your name. And usually this is through a Buddhist tradition specific to Thailand, but the monks will come up with some auspicious names, and oftentimes you'll choose one. And so that renaming is something that has roots in many, many cultures, because it has power and because it has some truth and because it can be the symbol for that new phase.
Well, you know, names have energy and power, you know, and like say when the medicine man or the medicine person works with an individual, you know, they look at them from birth all the way up and look at the attributes and how they carry themselves. They might be connected to the horse nation, they might be connected to the buffalo nation, and so they'll take on that energy and name that ties them back to that nation. And that's how they receive their names. And aside from, I mean, the biggest part is tying back to the spirit world and getting confirmation of that name, because there's one name that's earthbound, and then there's another that's
Spirit-bound.
Spirit-bound, yeah.
Right.
But if you can combine the both, it's marrying that male-female.
Right.
And that.
Which is so important. I often talk to my students too. We're going to wrap this up in just a second, but I could talk to you forever.
Yeah.
You know? But I talk to my students about the importance of merging that male and female, but also the idea that Western medicine and a lot of Western psychology, things like that, they do have a very masculine feel to it and very dominant, and it's the seen and it is the objective experience, but all of our quality of life really comes from our subjective experience. And the traditional cultures really studied that so in depth. You know, That was such a strong focus. And so blending those together and marrying them, it seems like a pretty good idea. You know, but we better bring the best from each side into this marriage, because even like the masculine and feminine, we have toxicity in both, and we have things that are absolutely pure and beautiful together. And so recognizing that and bringing the best masculine, the best feminine together, that's where we have heaven on earth, you know?
Well, I believe that's like marrying the mind and heart.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the mind is completely masculine, but the heart is feminine. And when you do the integration, then you really become a well-balanced individual. And a lot of us want to stay in our mind because we want to be witty or an intellectual that speaks beyond, or want to be a great inventor. But really the reality is when we marry that heart and mind, we're really bringing the male and female together and becoming one within ourselves. Because the longest journey we'll take will be from here back to here. You know,
and you know what? It's so important to do that, and going on that journey, doing that inner work is really important. I said that business for me has been a spiritual experience, and it's things like recognizing the transition from being willing to be tempted by almost any customer, and then you get to the point where after a while, when you have that connection and that strength, you're way more selective, you know. You would rather lose your entire business than do something unethical, you know. And you really are willing to go to that place. And it is that confidence that builds inside you, and that connection and the ethics and the strength that you have from doing that work.
I call it awareness. Because if you're not aware of your surroundings, then something will creep in. It might smell good, taste good, look good, but it might be also wrong.
Because it presents the same, but moves in.
So you have to really be aware of what comes in and out of your world, and that's where we go into the Sacred Path program. Talks about the energetic field and how to restore that field where nothing can get in.
Right.
Because it's like an egg that's fragmented. An egg that's fragmented loses the albumin, and then the yolk spoils. When you lose your power, it's like losing the albumin, and then your spirit spoils. You see, but how did it get in? It got in through a port.
Right.
It fragmented that sacred space and sacred hoop.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So, standing guard.
All right.
So, all right. Thank you so much.
You bet.
For information on becoming a licensed massage therapist, visit zmc.edu. For information on continuing your education in massage therapy and bodywork, visit studyhealing.com. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe.